The palace grew quieter as days passed, yet silence did not bring peace. The human walked its halls without fear, and everywhere he went, eyes followed him, guards stared with unease, servants whispered in corners, and the princess kept her distance. Her maids, however, lived in the middle of the storm, bound by law, yet uncertain of their place. At night, they gathered in their chamber, a room of silk curtains and glowing lamps. Their whispers filled the air. Each one carried different thoughts, different fears. One maid, tall and sharp-eyed, spoke with anger. We should resist him. We should show him we are not his property. She clenched her fists, her pride burning. Another, gentle and soft-spoken, shook her head. If we resist, we risk punishment. He is not like our lords, but he is still dangerous. He carries a power I do not understand. A third maid, younger and curious, leaned closer. But did you not see how he treated us? He gives no orders, he speaks no cruelty. He does not even look at us the way our own warriors would have. Is that not strange? The others fell silent. Each of them remembered the human's calm, the weight of his silence, the way his words carried not pride but certainty. The princess, seated at her table, listened quietly. She did not join their talk, but their words sank into her heart. She wanted to order them to reject him, to hate him, but the memory of his eyes, steady and unshaken, haunted her. The next morning, the human entered their chamber unannounced. His steps were quiet but firm. The maids stood quickly, startled. Their hands reached for cloth, for vases, for anything they could use as defense. But he raised a hand slowly, not in threat, but in calm. I did not come to harm you, he said. His voice was steady, his words simple. He looked at them not as trophies, but as people. The tall maid, the one filled with anger, spoke first. Then why are we here? By your law, we are yours. You could command us, break us, yet you do not. Why? The human's gaze moved across each of them, then settled on the princess. Because strength is not in chains, he answered. It is in choice. A house ruled by fear collapses. A house built on loyalty stands forever. His words stunned them. The maids looked at each other. The princess lowered her eyes, hiding the storm inside her. That day, the human gave no orders. Instead, he asked questions. He asked about the palace, about the people, about the old traditions. He listened carefully to their answers, speaking little, but remembering much. The maids found themselves confused. They had expected a master, but he acted like a leader. They had expected commands, but he gave only questions. They had expected cruelty, but he gave silence and patience. At night, they gathered again, their whispers sharper now. The angry maid hissed, "This is his trick. He wants us to trust him. Then he will strike." The gentle one shook her head again. But if that were true, why wait? He had every chance to shame us, to hurt us, yet he did not. Maybe he is different. The curious maid smiled faintly. Maybe he is stronger because he does not need to act like the others. He already defeated the champion. He has nothing to prove. The princess turned her head, her voice soft. He speaks of loyalty, not of ownership, yet his silence is dangerous. I cannot see his heart, and that frightens me more than any sword. The maids grew restless, torn between doubt and hope. Their dilemma deepened with each passing day. For every moment they expected cruelty, they found calm instead. For every fear of chains, they found patience. The palace itself seemed to change. Servants began to speak of the human differently. Some still hated him, but others whispered of respect. He did not beat the guards. He did not steal from the treasury. He trained alone. He walked with discipline. He carried himself not like a conqueror, but like a commander. The maids could not escape his presence. They served his meals, prepared his chamber, and yet each task became a study. Each gesture revealed something they could not ignore. He was human, but he was not weak. He was victor, but he was not arrogant. One evening, as the rain returned, the princess stepped onto the balcony with her maids. The city lights glowed in the distance, silent beneath the storm. She spoke quietly, her voice trembling. Our people see him as danger, but I see him as something else. If he wished, he could burn us, yet he chooses not to. Why? The youngest maid whispered, maybe because he does not see us as enemies. Maybe he sees us as allies. The princess shook her head, unable to answer. Her pride told her to resist, but her heart whispered another truth. The dilemma grew heavier. Were they captives, or were they companions in waiting? Were they bound by law, or bound by something deeper that none of them understood yet? The human stood in the shadows of the chamber, unseen, but listening. His face calm, his eyes steady. He knew their whispers, he knew their doubts, and he knew that time would decide. Not words. The night stretched long, the rain sang against the stone. The maids lay awake, torn between fear and trust, and the princess stared into the darkness, knowing that their fate was no longer theirs alone. The dilemma had begun, and there was no turning back. The courtyard was still silent. Rain tapped against the stone floor, washing away the dust of battle. The human stood alone in the center, his sword resting quietly at his side. Around him, hundreds of alien eyes watched, their pride shattered, their voices stolen by disbelief. The champion, their strongest warrior, had fallen, and according to the oldest law of their people, the victor held claim not only to the fight, but to everything tied to the defeated. The law was not written on stone, it was carved into blood, passed down from generation to generation, a rule that no one dared to break. The council of elders sat in their high seats, their long robes shining with droplets of rain. They whispered among themselves, voices sharp with fear. To deny the law was to deny their ancestors. To deny the law was to risk rebellion. Yet the idea of a human holding claim over their royal household was unthinkable. The princess stood frozen, her silver crown glowed faintly in the firelight. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Her maids looked to her, their faces pale, their eyes filled with questions. They had been raised with the knowledge of this law. They knew what it meant, and they knew there was no escape. The eldest counselor finally spoke. His deep voice echoed across the courtyard. The law of victory is clear, he said. The human is now master by right of combat. The household of the champion falls under his claim. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Some bowed their heads in shame. Others clenched their fists in anger. A few looked at the human with silent respect, but none dared to challenge the truth of the words. The princess's heart pounded. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on her. She wanted to deny it, to shout that her bloodline was above such laws, but even she knew it was useless. To deny the code would be to destroy her people's honor, and no ruler could survive that. The human raised his head slowly. His eyes met the princess's. He did not smile. He did not gloat. His calm was steady, his silence heavier than any shout. It was as if he already understood the power of their traditions. As if he had expected this all along. One of the younger maids whispered under her breath, "Concubines by law." Her words trembled in the air. The others stared at her, fear flashing in their eyes. For them, it was not just a title, it was a bond, an unbreakable chain tied by their own people's customs. The princess's knees weakened. She sat slowly back on her throne. Her hands gripped the cold arms of stone. Her face burned with humiliation, yet deep inside, a strange thought unsettled her heart. Why did this human not celebrate? Why did he not raise his sword in victory like her own warriors always did? His calm unnerved her more than his blade. The counselors bowed their heads toward the human. Their voices united. "By our law, you have claim," they said. "What is your will, victor of the champion?" The crowd leaned forward, waiting. The princess closed her eyes for a moment, praying the human would say nothing cruel, praying he would not strip her dignity away in front of her people. But the human spoke only one sentence. His voice was steady, low, yet it carried across the courtyard like thunder. "I take what is bound by your law." The words struck the crowd harder than any blade. Some gasped, some hissed in anger, But none could deny him. The law gave him that right, and his silence carried more weight than the proudest shout of a king. The maids clung to one another. Their faces were pale, their futures no longer their own. One of them whispered, "Is this the end of us?" Another answered, "It is the beginning of something else." The princess kept her eyes fixed on the human, trying to read the truth in his expression, but his face betrayed nothing. He did not look at her with cruelty, nor with lust. He looked at her as if she were a puzzle, a responsibility, not a prize. This confused her more than anything. If he had mocked her, she could have hated him. If he had threatened her, she could have resisted. But his silence made her uncertain, and uncertainty was far more dangerous than fear. The rain fell harder. The torches hissed as water dripped from their flames. The council rose from their seats and declared the gathering over. The law was spoken, and it would not be undone. The crowd began to scatter, their voices hushed, their steps heavy with shame. The once proud people could not understand how a single human had overturned their strongest champion. They could not understand how fate had placed their princess and her maids in his hands. As the courtyard emptied, the human stood alone. His sword still at his side, he did not leave. He only stood, waiting. His calm presence filling the silence more than any roar of victory ever could. The princess turned her head away, hiding her trembling hands from her maids. She whispered so softly that no one could hear, "Who are you, human, and why do you not fear us?" But the human gave no answer. He simply stood in the rain, unshaken, untouchable. The weight of the ancient law had sealed their fates, and the night would be remembered for generations. The law of victory had been spoken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The palace corridors were long and cold, lined with tall pillars of black stone that reached toward the ceiling like the bones of some ancient beast. The human walked between them in silence, his boots echoing softly. Behind him, the alien guards kept their distance, unsure whether to treat him as a guest or a conqueror. The princess followed reluctantly, her steps light, her silver crown dim in the torchlight. Her maids moved close to her, whispering quietly. Their faces were filled with worry. They had grown up inside these walls. Yet tonight the palace no longer felt like their home. The law of victory had already spread through every hall. Servants whispered in corners. Guards avoided eye contact. No one dared to speak against the old code. The human had won, and the household of the champion, including the princess and her maids, was now his by right. The princess's heart burned. With shame, she had been raised with honor, raised to believe her people were unmatched. Yet here she was, walking beside the very man who had broken that illusion in front of them all. Still, the human did not act like a man drunk with victory. He spoke no cruel words, he gave no mocking glances, he only walked calmly, as if the palace already belonged to him. His silence was heavier than any chains. They entered the grand chamber of the household, a vast room filled with silk banners, glowing crystals, and carved statues of alien warriors who had lived long before. The princess stood before the throne of her ancestors, her pride wounded, but not broken. The counselors gathered once more, their voices low and sharp. The eldest among them cleared his throat and said, "By the law, this chamber and all who dwell within it are yours. Human, speak your claim so that it is witnessed by all." The human raised his head slowly. His eyes scanned the chamber, resting on the maids, then on the princess. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched until even the guards shifted uncomfortably. Finally, his voice came, steady and calm. "I claim what your law has given, not to destroy, but to hold." The words rippled through the chamber like a wave. The counselors frowned, the maids exchanged looks of confusion. The princess stiffened, her lips parting slightly. She had expected greed, arrogance, maybe even cruelty. But not this. The youngest maid whispered to her sister, "What does he mean to hold?" The other shook her head, unable to answer. The princess stepped forward, her pride forcing her to speak. Her voice rang clear across the chamber. "Human, you have defeated our champion. And by law you have claim, but do not mistake silence. For obedience we are bound by custom, but our hearts are not yours." The human met her gaze. His eyes were not angry, not mocking, but steady. "Hearts cannot be taken," he said. "They must be given." The maids gasped softly. The counselors exchanged nervous glances. The princess's breath caught in her chest. For the first time, she felt her certainty falter. The human turned away from her and spoke to the council instead. "I do not need slaves," he said. "I need loyalty. I need strength. If your law binds them to me, then I will treat them not as broken things, but as those who stand at my side." The room fell silent again. The elders did not know how to answer. This was not how conquerors spoke. This was not how victory was supposed to sound. The princess clenched her fists. Her pride urged her to speak again, to deny him. Yet another part of her, a smaller, quieter part, wondered if this strange man's words carried more power than even his sword. That night, the maids gathered in their private quarters. Their whispers filled the room like restless birds. One said, "He does not treat us like spoils." Another said, "He speaks like a leader." A third added, "Maybe he is more dangerous for that very reason." The princess listened from her seat, her heart heavy. She wanted to tell them to hate him, to resist him, yet her mind replayed his words again and again. Hearts cannot be taken, they must be given. The rain had stopped outside. The palace was quiet, but inside her chest, storms were rising. The human rested in the guest chamber, though it no longer belonged to guests. He sat in silence, polishing his sword, not as a trophy, but as a tool. His eyes reflected no joy, no arrogance, only thought. He understood what he had taken, and he understood what it would cost to hold it. The night grew deep, and though the palace seemed asleep, none truly rested. The princess stared at the ceiling of her chamber, her maids restless in their beds. The law had bound them to the human, but something stronger than law was beginning to stir an uncertainty that would change everything. The claim was spoken, and though the words were simple, they carried weight that none could ignore. The human had claimed more than a throne, more than a household. He had claimed the beginning of a bond no one had expected. The courtyard of the alien palace was filled with firelight and echoing drums. The air was heavy with mist, glowing torches burning against the stone walls. A crowd of tall blue-skinned aliens gathered around the arena, their voices rising like a storm. They laughed, they shouted. They mocked the lone human who stood quietly at the center. The human was not dressed like a warrior. He had no heavy armor, no shining jewels, only a simple chestplate, a steel sword at his side, and calm eyes that did not move. He looked small compared to the massive alien champion who towered before him. The champion's muscles were like iron, his skin marked with glowing tattoos of victory. His people cheered loudly, certain he would crush the outsider in moments. The princess sat upon her throne of stone and silver. Her maids gathered behind her. Their eyes sparkled with amusement. They whispered to each other, pointing at the human with soft laughter. To them he was only a curiosity, a fragile creature pretending to be brave. The drums stopped. The champion roared, lifting his giant blade high into the air. His step shook the ground as he charged. The crowd shouted with thunder, "End it quickly! Show him the strength of our blood!" But the human did not move. His eyes followed every step of the champion. His hand rested lightly on his sword. He seemed too calm, almost careless. The champion swung with the force of a storm. His blade was like lightning, cutting through the air with a sound that made even the strongest warriors flinch. The ground cracked where it struck, but the human was no longer there. He had moved with speed that the aliens had never seen before. Gasps rose from the crowd. The maids leaned forward, their laughter fading into silence. The princess's smile froze on her lips. The human struck back. His blade flashed like silver fire. His movements were sharp, precise, without wasted motion. Each strike forced the champion back. Step after step, the giant warrior stumbled. His roars of rage filled the night. The crowd grew silent. The sound of steel rang through the courtyard. The champion swung again and again, his power shaking the stones. Yet the human evaded every strike, his calm never breaking. His eyes burned with strange focus, as if he already knew the outcome. The princess clutched her seat. Her heart pounded. Though she tried to hide it, never before had she seen anyone move like this. The human was not fighting with strength alone. He was fighting with something more, something the aliens had no word for. The champion grew desperate. His movements grew heavy. His breath came hard. He swung wildly, but his blade met only air. The human's sword slipped past his guard again and again. His defense crumbled like sand. Finally, in one swift motion, the human closed the distance. His sword moved with perfect precision. The champion fell to his knees. His weapon clattered against the stone. The sound of it echoed like thunder through the silent courtyard. The crowd froze in disbelief. Their voices died in their throats. The impossible had happened before their eyes. The princess rose slowly, her breath caught in her chest. Her maids stared wide-eyed, whispering in shock. The champion, the pride of their people, was defeated, and the human stood tall, his blade at his side, his eyes calm and unshaken. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the soft sound of rain beginning to fall. Drops of water struck the stone, running down the human's armor like silver lines. The princess could not look away. She felt a strange fear deep inside her, not because of cruelty, not because of violence, but because of the human's silence. His calm was more terrifying than any roar of war. The maids clutched each other's arms. One whispered, "How could this be?" Another whispered, "What will happen to us now?" The human did not speak. He lowered his sword and stepped back. His eyes lifted toward the throne, toward the princess. For the first time, she felt her power slip away. She felt like the world she had known was ending. The council members shifted uneasily. Tradition weighed heavily upon them. The law of victory was older than the throne, older than the crown itself, by their own code. The human had won not only the fight, but also the right to claim the household of the fallen champion. The princess's lips trembled. She wanted to speak, to command, to deny what she had just seen, but no words came. Her voice was trapped in her throat. Her maids looked at her, waiting, but she could only stare at the man who had just broken the pride of her people. The rain fell harder. The torches hissed in the wet air. The crowd remained silent. The human stood alone in the center, victorious, unshaken, his presence filling the courtyard like a storm that would not pass. The champion had fallen, and with him, the certainty of the alien people. Something had changed forever, and everyone knew it.